Speeds at the Tour de France are faster than ever.
100 kilometers done, and the average speed is 51.4 kilometers per hour. And we don't even have a breakaway up the road yet.
Records set during some of the sport's darkest times are now being broken.
Pogacar goes, Pogacar's on the attack. Can anybody respond? And he has just obliterated a record up this mountain that stood for 26 years.
But we as cycling fans are told the sport is clean. You'd be forgiven for being somewhat sceptical.
The pace again today is absolutely relentless. Surely things have got to settle down in this stage soon.
But what is truly driving that increase in speed? I'm on a mission to find out.
When it's fast, it's warp speed.
6 watts per kilo for 20 minutes was a pretty good time, whereas now 6 watts a kilo for 20 minutes is, it just doesn't cut it.
But unfortunately, we're in a competitive sport. If you want to win bike races, you have to embrace this, and that change is a necessary process.
The sport has changed, the demands have changed.
Almost not many people ride together now because they can't. I've got this exact training, you've got that exact training, and we can't combine them.
100 watts down. It just has really shown me how much your performance is impacted by the heat.
Are speeds higher though? Well, the simple answer, if you look at the stats, is yes. The last 4 editions of the Tour de France have been some of the fastest on record. And last year, average speeds were the highest on record across all World Tour races. Even faster this year. And in the major classics this season, speeds were fastest on average since 2006. Before we look at what is actually driving these changes, how fast do these speeds feel in the pro peloton, and are riders actually noticing them? So someone who's been through it all the last 12 years, Rinos Grenadiers, is Luke Rowe, and he had some really interesting thoughts.
I think in pro racing compared to non-pro racing there's a bigger differential in pro racing. And when it's slow, we can go very slow. When the brake's gone, it's chilled, and you can really throttle back. When it's fast, it's warp speed. If we rewind back to start of my career 12 and the end of my career 24, I'd say not a lot changed between maybe 12 and 16, 17. And since then, it's just been like an arms race. I think there was a big gap in how organised teams were, especially through the whole depth of the squad. But, I think now all World Tour teams are organised on the bike, off the bike, behind the scenes. The level of professionalism has gone up tenfold. Certainly in the last few years, my numbers were better than ever. And I think I was, compared to the peloton, the last few years I was at a lower level. Yeah, for me, the first time I seen it was actually Theo Gegenhardt joined us for team camp. He came on the December camp and the conversation about altitude came up. And he'd already been on altitude camps the year prior. So it was that kind of hit me, that an under 23 had already been on altitude camp, and that was the beginning of the change. I remember thinking, Christ, I've only just started on going altitude camps, and I've been pro 7 years. When I was turned pro, it was, there's a few websites, it was quite old school, Strava was there, but you couldn't really see how much guys were training, and everyone had their own coach, everyone had their own ideas and philosophy, but now the knowledge was there before and it's there now, but it's just the accessibility. A 15-year-old kid can sit at home and pretty much learn how a pro trains, lives, eats, races, podcasts, all these things. So they turn pro and they're, I wouldn't say the finished product, but a long way towards it, where I was under 23 and it was still chain gangs and sprinting for town signs and last one to the calf buys the cups of tea. It was still that old school side of things, where now, I've been there, in places where there's a lot of pro cyclists living, and almost not many people ride together now because they can't. I've got this exact training, you've got that exact training, and we can't combine them. And you see everyone's going out and doing their own thing. That kind of group cycling mentality, certainly among the pros, is almost dead because training is so individual.
It's interesting to hear what speeds feel like in the pro peloton now, and just the level of professionalism that young riders have who are just turning pro. But let's go back from the modern day for a second. The 90s were a totally different era for our sport. My hero as a kid when I was growing up was Lance Armstrong. I believed in him and he let me down. We all know that story, and whatever your opinion on it, it's always going to be in our memories. And now, when we witness incredible feats of performance, our skepticisms resurface. They're there, and just talk of speeds being higher and higher sets off alarm bells, which is unfair, because modern day riders have nothing to do with what happened in the past and that era. But still, now, Pogacar beats Pantani's record at the Plateau de Bay by 3 minutes and 48 seconds. An incredible performance, but that is a record which has stood for 28 years. It was set in the 90s. And you can see again why we as cycling fans raise our skepticism.
I do think it is very easy to be skeptical on social media. But when you take time to kind of really consider where science, new thinking, the latest tech has allowed riders to push their performance to new limits, will you still be suspicious?
Speeds are supersonic in the pro peloton then, and one thing that has driven that away from the rider is tech. Bikes are better than ever before, and the developments keep on coming. But as the old saying goes, it's not all about the bike, or is it? To find out, I've come to Manchester Velodrome to meet Dan Bigham, a man who knows a thing or two, riding as fast as possible. Dan can be described as something of a trailblazer when it comes to finding performance gains on the track. With a degree in motorsport engineering up his sleeve, Dan put that knowledge to good use, racking up success as part of trade team Ribble Worldtide, beating much bigger, well-funded opposition on the track. Part of that was due to his strength, but also part of it was his ability to evolve the tech he was using to ride faster than ever. Since then, he's taken the hour world record, as well as step up and take European, world and Olympic medals on the track. His expertise has also seen him land a role at Ineos Grenadiers as a performance engineer, and next year he's about to move across to Red Bull Bora Hansgrohe and take a position of head of engineering. At the moment, he's currently preparing for one last tilt at the World Track Championships, and who better to speak to find out how far tech has come in cycling and how far it will potentially go. Dan, to kick us off, I'm going to jump in straight at the deep end.
Yep.
How do you think you'd have gone in the hour record if you'd have been on the same equipment as Jens Voigt?
So, I mean, it has moved on quite a bit. I think a lot of what I had available probably wasn't a million miles off becoming available at Jens's time, but he also wasn't a renowned time charger. He didn't really throw everything at deep end, but at least a kilometre, probably closer on 2.
And I know what he averaged for that hour, and it is very low. And it's just from doing everything right and squeezing every single watt out. And that's a prime example.
Tech, as a performance area in the sport, is obviously massive. But how have you witnessed in your time in the sport, how have you witnessed that change?
I think the attitude's probably the big one. I mean, you and I raced each other a few times back in 2013, 14, 15, probably something like that on a few of the domestic scene, and even like aero socks back then, you get belittled and just, people just, their minds were blown that aero socks were even a thing. And nowadays, if you don't turn up on the start line with them, then you're not even in the race, to be honest.
Do you think there was a point where that shifted? There was like a specific moment in the sport where everyone sat up and was like, okay, we need to pay more attention to this? Or was it a more gradual thing?
I guess you see things from your own perspective, and from my perspective, probably, in fact, on this very velodrome in 2018, when absolute nobody's Team KGF turned up and nearly beat the European champs, I think it was France at the time, in the bronze medal final here, and we're like, where have they come from kind of thing. And for me, that felt like a watershed moment because I could see it coming and we were working on it, and then suddenly it was on the world stage. But obviously it happens in different ways in different areas.
How much of a kind of tech arms race do you think there is in cycling, to the extent where you see it in F1 and teams are quite kind of secretive with what they're developing? Are we seeing that to the same extent in cycling?
Yes, I would argue it's even a knowledge arms race. That technology, if you have some technology, it brings you performance, but if you have knowledge, you understand why that technology works and how you can continue to improve it. So you could make, for example, you can make a fast tyre, but if you know why it's a fast tyre, then you can continue to make a faster and faster and faster tyre and keep pushing things forward. And it's the same in every area of equipment. And now we're in that point where you're chasing the knowledge, you're trying to understand the base things. Why does a tyre behave in a certain way around grip or in rolling resistance or on rough surfaces? Why does a skin suit work well in high speeds or high air densities or high yaw angles, and same with wheels and tyres. And once you really drill down and understand the base reasons, that's when you can really pull all the different levers to improve performance.
Yeah, I think it just shows to me like how far the sport's come in this area. There's still that traditional aspect though to cycling, which I encountered. I mean, you said earlier about like wearing a skin suit to a road race. I remember wearing skin suits to like stages of a Grand Tour, and everyone being like, "What are you doing? You're going to be so uncomfortable." But for me, it was so important because I was so big, so tall. It made a massive difference to me. So I was always there. But do you still encounter that sort of traditional skepticism?
Yes, I'd say it's commonplace within the sport, and I appreciate why. People are in the sport for different reasons. I'm in the sport because I genuinely enjoy the application of engineering, and that's what drives me. But some people love the nature and the style of where the sport's come from, and the sort of panache, passion, whatever you want to call it. That's what people enjoy about the sport, and if it changes, then they feel like the sport that they know and love changes. And I can appreciate that. But unfortunately, we're in a competitive sport. If you want to win bike races, you have to embrace this, and that change is a necessary process. I mean, it's the only way to get faster. You have to change, and it's the only sustainable way to maintain a competitive advantage, to change and to improve.
And what would you say to people who are maybe sceptical about current speeds in the pro peloton?
Neil deGrasse Tyson, scientist, put it really well. The good thing about science is it's true whether you believe in it or not. And to be honest, the numbers don't lie. We're getting faster. When you measure rolling resistance, you measure drivetrain efficiency, you measure aerodynamics, your CDA, all these values, they're getting lower, they're getting more efficient, and not by an insignificant amount. If you go back 10, 15, 20 years when we were on, 20 mil tubulars, maybe considering clinchers, drivetrain, no one ever heard of a wax, skin suits, non-existent, cables everywhere, round frames, all of that stuff. We're probably in the region of 20, 30, 40% reduction in a lot of these values.
And looking to the future then, where do you see the potential gains coming from? Like, where are the specifics, and how much further do you think it's going to go? Like, how much faster a rider's going to get?
So I think the big one is going to come down to where the UCI regulations lie.
Yeah.
At the moment, they're an arbitrary line that you can go up to. Occasionally, you can step over it in certain areas, but they obviously stamp on you a little bit and push you back. But that's going to be the driving factor on how far we can go. I think performance mostly in the next sort of 5 to 10 years will be around optimizing on a case-by-case basis. So whether that's rider-specific things, skin suits, helmets, position, clothing, shoes, crank lengths, Q factors, etc. But then also race-specific. So what yaw angles will you see, what speeds will be at, how rough are the surfaces, what's the optimal trade-off between weight, aero, grip, rolling resistance, even like your drivetrain efficiency, how big can you go on chain rings but still pedal at the optimal cadence, all those kind of things. You're going to get to the point where you have to define your setup perfectly, like in motorsport, like in Formula One, changing wings, changing tyre pressures, changing springs and dampers and setups everywhere. But that, I believe, is where the future will be.
Decathlon AG2R La Mondiale have racked up 30 victories this season, a very successful year for the French World Tour squad. Part of this is down to the team's coaches. After all, training a rider is pretty key to achieving maximum performance. So to find out more on how they actually do this, I caught up with one of their current coaches.
So I'm the head coach for Decathlon AG2R La Mondiale for this upcoming season. So that kind of role encompasses having a strategy of philosophy among our coaches. We have in our team 7 coaches across our 3 different teams. So we got the Conti team, U19 team. So my main role is creating the coaching group, and also I coach and monitor the whole lot of the World Tour group as well.
You've got a lot of experience as a coach. You've been in this game now for many years. You're actually part of the team that I rode for as well. Go back a way now. How have you seen this change since then? Like, have you got more freedom as a coach to say to team managers, like, we need to do this with this rider, and you're given that go ahead?
Yeah, I think certainly in the last couple of years, the coach certainly has become a key person in the performance teams of all World Tour teams. Coaches now are much more reactive. We've much more access to data where we can see if a rider is responding well or not responding at all to the stimulus that's been given to them by a coach.
I think in my own experience, when I was racing, a lot of pressure would fall on the rider. Like if they weren't performing, the questions would be asked to the rider. Do you think some of those questions now land on the coach? Is there more pressure from a coaching perspective?
I think a little bit more. Of course, I think a lot of my philosophy is based around trying to remove as many excuses as I can from the rider. There is much more of an equilibrium between the responsibility of the rider and the coach. I think the coaches now are taking more responsibility. Therefore, with more responsibility comes more. If things don't go well, you need to make sure you have the information as to why. And it's not just the rider's fault. So, yeah.
And how high is the bar now in professional cycling at the very top?
Yeah, I mean it's I think it's been quite drastic. The performance improvements that we've seen certainly in the last 3 to 5 years. When I compare riders watts from 2013, 2014, 2015 to now, there is a significant difference. I think what's most interesting is the rate of change every year. That every year there's almost a 3 to 5% increase in the demands of races. Like, back when you and me were in the same team, 6 watts per kilo for 20 minutes was a pretty good time. Whereas now 6 watts a kilo for 20 minutes is, it just doesn't cut it in any race. It's much more closer to 6.5, 6.6, 6.8 at the base. So the sport has changed, the demands have changed. It's up to the coaches really to be aware of what those changes are. The sexiest word at the moment really is durability. I think durability is something that we've used in the past. It's called fatigue resistance, or we've used different words for it. But durability really is your ability to produce power after a certain amount of energy expenditure. And we see now with these big classic races that the intensity is much, much higher earlier. And every year that intensity just increases. And you see after 200K, after 220K, that's when the big moves are made. So what you're seeing really is a rider's ability to produce a high amount of power, close to what they can do when they're fresh, after 3, 4, 5,000 kilojoules. That really is probably the biggest indicator if somebody's on form. When you look at some of the younger riders, again, there's obviously a bigger influx of younger riders in the World Tour as well. And we are no exception to that rule. You're obviously looking for riders who have a high VO2 max, who have a high engine. And then again, you look at their trainability. Is this rider, does he have the capacity, the engine to adapt to a training stimulus? And if they've got a high VO2 max, it often means that they have the engine to be able to absorb and adapt to a higher volume and a higher amount of threshold work, a higher amount of tempo work. And that in itself are the two key things that we look at.
Do you think to that extent then, because like durability, that is a hard thing to train for, like 6-hour rides, that's tough efforts at the start, at the end. Do you think training's got harder in general, or has training just got smarter?
I think it's both. And why I say that is training's got smarter because I think riders now fuel much, much better during training now than they would have in the past. And again, I know I think the whole nutrition thing is something that's been spoken about. And of course, riders 5 years ago, 10 years ago, fueled well. I'm not saying they fueled poorly, but there is certainly an increase in the amount of carbohydrates that we know now that riders can tolerate. In training sessions now, we've got guys doing 100, 120 grams, 140 grams of carbs per hour during training sessions. So they've got smarter, which allows them then to train harder. So when to give an example, I coached Conor, who has had quite a good year, but we looked at him before the World Championships, where he came second, and we knew he had to be around about 4 watts a kilo for for 5 hours to be competitive. And 4 watts a kilo for 5 hours is something that, again, you would never prescribe that in training. But when you look at what he's done in this year in his training, we've accumulated that over the course of the last 2-3 years, where he can now ride at 3.8, 4, 4.2, 4.4 watts per kilo for an extended period of time.
And do you think, on that note, like, because when I was in it, pro cycling is just so weight obsessed, and to like up your carb intake, to have to take that amount of carbs on board, do you think that sort of philosophy, that weight obsessed philosophy, has moved to the back a little bit, or is it still present?
Of course, it's still present, because obviously with cycling, it's a weight. The performance is affected by weight. We all know watts per kilo, but I genuinely hear much less discussion around it than, again, when you and I were in the same team. It was a big thing, especially for you. You're almost 2 meters tall. It was a big thing. I remember doing your first Vuelta, where weight was a huge factor that we tried to manage and control. Whereas now, honestly, in the last few years, of course, it's still a factor. But I think riders are more aware now of how to fuel correctly.
But one last question, Stephen, before I leave you. So we've seen big performances in the last year or two. And, as cycling fans, we've had bad experiences in the past. So what would you say, from your involvement in professional cycling, being around riders, coaching riders, what would you say to those who are skeptical?
I think it's always good to be skeptical. I think it's always good. I think it's important to ask questions. I think it's important to try to understand why. And me as a coach, my job is often to understand, why and how these guys go so fast. So what guys are doing is they're training better, simple as that. They're training more because they're fueling better. And that whole side of, I know you've spoken to some experts in the field around aerodynamics, that really is something that we see a big shift in. You see the speeds have just changed completely. 40, 42k an hour was a normal pro race 5 years ago. Now it's 45, 46, 47. And a big part of that is tires, wheels, equipment. So at what point it will stop? At what point are we going to hit a roadblock? That will happen at some point. But yeah, I think the next big thing that we're going to start working on really is economy and efficiency, and how riders will save energy in the bunch, in the pelotons. And it's an exciting time to be involved in professional cycling.
Interesting to hear from Stephen, and also touch on some areas of training that weren't even a thing when I raced 5 years ago. On that note, one area which is quite a buzzword in pro cycling right now, and wasn't when I was racing, is heat training. To find out more, I headed over to Precision Fuel and Hydration HQ to check out their heat lab. Hey Lindsay.
G'day Conor.
Thanks for having us.
That's all right. Welcome.
I'm here to meet Lindsay Hunt, who is Precision Fuel and Hydration's Senior Sports Scientist. He'll be the one cranking up the heat for me today inside the heat chamber, if you excuse the pun. I feel like I've just walked into a sauna.
Perfect. That's what we've got it for.
So how hot is it?
Right now it's about 38.5 degrees.
38.5 degrees. And how hot can it get?
About 45 is the highest we've seen.
45 degrees Celsius. That is hot. How do you heat it up in here?
We have these two heaters here which heat up to about 45 degrees. There's one over there as well, and they circulate hot air through.
So I've come here to do an acclimation test. What does that involve, and why is it so important for athletes?
It involves cycling for 60 minutes in a hot environment. During this test, we'll have you at 40 degrees. We'll have you cycling to get you to an average heart rate of around 75% of your max. And we'll measure your sweat rate through body mass pre and post, measure your core temperature, heart rate and power throughout the session, and see your drift and how well you handle the heat.
So I guess I better get kitted up and get ready for the test. I think I'm looking forward to this. Let's give it a go. Right then, time to jump on the scales. See what my weight is before and then after. 91.6. Lindsay got me all set up for my experiment, which was to ride at 75% of my FTP for 60 minutes in a room at 40 degrees Celsius. My starting target power was 280 watts. My aim was to see how the heat would impact my effort and how far my power would drop by the end of the experiment. It's very, very hot. Time to get going. See how I perform in the heat. Here we go.
I'll leave you to it.
Thanks a lot, Lindsay.
Question is, where's the emergency button? There is a air conditioner over there. And we've got windows.
So I'm getting to the harder part of this warm-up. Getting myself sweat already. Getting pretty hot already. So about 17 minutes in. Now it's a case of seeing what happens to my power, but it's starting to get uncomfortable now. Just gone over halfway through. The power's dropped considerably. Heart rate's still struggling to go under 150. I've drunk a litre of water and electrolyte mix already, which is mad, and I'm still really thirsty, just can't stop reaching for it. Getting to the end of the test now, coming up to the conclusion. The fans have been running the whole time, but I mean, it's just blowing hot air. It's like riding in front of a hairdryer. I was just thinking about my experience at Unbound over in Kansas, and it was similar temperatures to this. And through my own error, I was in a situation like this with nothing to drink. And I mean, my power's dropped so fast in the space of less than an hour. So 200-mile event, you can just imagine what happens over such a long period. Bad mistake to make, that one. Oh wow. Last 5 minutes, my power is so low, so low.
Oh, g'day Connor, how you going?
We're back, Lindsay.
What is this?
I'm a bit different to when you left me.
Yeah, for sure. What is this, about 100 watts less?
Even more,
Lovely.
130.
Love to see it. These are the effects of the heat, hey?
Oh my goodness. Oh. Ooh. Oh, the air. Oh, that's nice. Oh my gosh. Right, I've had a shower. I've tried to make myself look somewhat presentable, but still pretty hot. So I weighed myself.
Yep.
91.3 kilos, so it's like 300 grams I've lost.
Yep.
I'm really interested, Lindsay, to see what my results are. So how does that all translate?
Yeah, so if you take into account the fluid you drank, you actually lost just over 2 litres in that hour.
Okay.
So it's quite a lot for someone like yourself, and you wouldn't be able to replace all of that very easily if you were exercising outdoors.
In the space of just an hour as well.
Exactly.
And in terms of my kind of power drop off, what are we looking at? Like how much power did I lose over that?
From when we started, you were sitting at around 259 watts, and by the end, you're at 134. So it's a 52%. You were exercising at 52% of your original power.
52% down.
Yeah, for the same heart rate.
That's mad, isn't it? In such a short space of time. Is that like a fairly kind of common number you'd see amongst athletes, or is that a poor performance?
I'd say that's about average. It might be just above average.
Yeah, okay. And so what we've learned here, obviously my power's dropped off a cliff.
Yeah.
But what would I do now to stop that happening in the future?
If you wanted to stop that happening in the future, you'd continue doing heat sessions. So ideally consecutive days, or at least close to consecutive days, and maintain that for as long as you can before races.
So how many sessions are we talking here, acclimatization sessions?
At a minimum, to see some pretty big effects, you're looking at 3 to 5 days for men, and then for women we see that it's typically a little bit longer, so 5 to 7 is what you need. Okay, and what would I be seeing then after that? Like, how much power would I be dropping off? If I'm doing the work, I'm doing a session similar to that, coming in every day. Yeah, it's hard to say exactly, but by 10 sessions, you'd expect that you'd pretty much be within 90% of what you start at. That's big. What's actually going on in the body to lead to that? The biggest factor that goes on early on is an increase in blood plasma volume. So you essentially build more blood volume, and you can defend increases in skin blood flow due to the heat. And so you can maintain more blood in the system and pump more blood around the body. How many kind of pro athletes
cyclists, teams, do you think are using this sort of testing to adapt their performance in the heat?
I'd say a lot of the top teams are. We know for sure that we know a few athletes are and a few teams are for sure. I'd say there's other teams out there that are doing so but are less public about it. And I think if you were a professional team at the moment not doing something like this, you were missing out.
Wow, I mean, that's enough in itself. I guess for me, like, altitude training has always been the big one. It's like altitude, altitude, altitude. Where does kind of heat training sit next to that?
Yeah, so there's a few different things going on. With altitude training, often the best results are seen with 4 weeks of altitude training, and the dose that you need is quite long. So you need to be in altitude for at least 12 hours a day for that duration to see around a 4% improvement in hemoglobin mass. And that translates to an improvement in VO2 max, and that's what typically athletes have chased in the past. And so with heat training, if you do it for long enough, so the best results have been seen for 14 or more days of heat training. And with that, they've seen roughly similar results in hemoglobin mass. So around 3.5 to 4% improvements with around 5 weeks of heat training.
Wow, so similar improvements really.
Yeah, if you can't go high, get hot.
Wow, it's been amazing to come here, see the heat lab, meet the team at Precision, and also talk to Lindsay about heat acclimatization and how your performance is impacted by it. It's really blown my mind actually, because I knew firsthand from my racing experience how much it can affect you, but I just did not know it'll be that much. I was riding at 52% less power after pretty much under an hour of riding. And the fact that you can address that, improve it with some really specific heat training and get it pretty much near to what you'd be doing under normal conditions is massive. We're not talking 1 or 2% here. We're talking like 40%. It's huge. The difference between understanding how to get on top of this and not is big. So if you're not doing this, you're nowhere near good enough.
I think first of all to answer that is I understand why they'd be sceptical, and I think to a certain extent I don't blame them. You know, if you take a step back and you follow the sport but you're not big numbers, you don't know about aerodynamics, you're just a fan of the sport, enjoy watching the bike racing, and you go in, well, he was cheating 15, 20 years ago, 100%, and now they're going substantially faster. So, you know, I get it. But I think we just need to, you know, maybe dig a bit deeper and look into some of the reasons why, which are, you know, we've gone over them. The level of professionalism has gone up tenfold. The level of equipment has gone up tenfold. The training is just, it's just snowballed dramatically over the past 5 years. And guys are just, they're more fit for purpose. They've always been full-time athletes, but now they eat, sleep, breathe it, and it's all that matters. They wake up and they say, how am I going to be in 24 hours a better rider than now? And they do that every day of the year. Where there wasn't that level of professionalism across the board 10, 15, 20 years ago. There wasn't. I'll argue with anyone to the death because there wasn't. So I would say I understand why some people are skeptical, but I would say, to caveat that, do a bit of research, and there's enough accessibility out there to knowledge to kind of explain why the races are going that fast. Because yeah, if you look at it, just the black and white facts, of course you're going to raise an eyebrow. It doesn't look quite right, but I think there is proper reason and evidence behind why.
I think Luke sums that up perfectly, actually, and really hits the nail on the head. It's my own similar thoughts, going on this journey, speaking to experts, seeing where the developments in performance have come from. They're huge. We're not talking small gains here, and that's just over the last 4 or 5 years. And everyone I spoke to pretty much said that if you're not doing the aspect and that specific thing, which I was looking to find out, and if another team isn't doing it, they're behind. They're not even on the pace. And these are all things which riders weren't doing 10, 15 years ago. That effort, that energy that is being put into developing riders now, it was going into cheating, to finding the best doctor, let's be frank. And I personally truly believe the sport is clean now. I do think that energy is going into advancing performance on the bike in a genuine way. I just think as well, though, we've all been burnt still. We will all have those suspicions, and it's going to be really hard to not have that. And it's on the generation of today to hopefully to prove me right and to prove us all right that we can trust these performances and they do come from a genuine place. But let me know what you think in the comment section. I think this will probably provoke a bit of debate. And also let me know if you want to see more content like this and more films to this extent. It's been really interesting to talk to everyone and hear their thoughts. It's just crazy how ferocious pro cycling is these days. I'm kind of glad I'm watching from the sidelines.